Genesis 491,618 verse 16. Dan shall judge his people. In the word judge there is an allusion to his name, for since, among the Hebrews, NWD, din signifies to judge, Rachel, when she returned thanks to God, gave this name to the son born to her by her handmaid, as if God had been the vindicator of her cause and right. Jacob now gives a new turn to the meaning of the name, namely, that the sons of Dan shall have no mean part in the government of the people. For the Jews foolishly restrict it to Samson, because he alone presided over the whole people, whereas the language rather applies to the perpetual condition of the tribe. Jacob therefore means that though Dan was born from a concubine, he shall still be one of the judges of Israel, because not only shall his offspring possess a share of the government and command in the common polity, so that this tribe may constitute one head, but it shall be appointed the bearer of a standard to lead the fourth division of the camp of Israel. 17. In the second place, his subtle disposition is described. For Jacob compares this people to serpents, who rise out of their lurking places, by stealth, against the unwary whom they wish to injure. The sense then is, that he shall not be so courageous as earnestly and boldly to engage in open conflict, but that he will fight with cunning, and will make use of snares. Yet, in the meantime, he shows that he will be superior to his enemies, whom he does not dare to approach with collected forces, just as serpents who, by their secret bite, cast down the horse and his rider. In this place also no judgment is expressly passed, whether this subtlety of Dan is to be deemed worthy of praise or of censure, though conjecture rather inclines us to place it among his faults, or at least his disadvantages, that instead of opposing himself in open conflict with his enemies, he will fight them only with secret frauds. Verse 18. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. It may be asked, in the first place, what occasion induced the holy man to break the connection of his discourse, and suddenly to burst forth in this expression? For whereas he had recently predicted the coming of the Messiah, the mention of salvation would have been more appropriate in that place. I think, indeed, that when he perceived, as from a lofty watchtower, the condition of his offspring continually exposed to various changes, and even to be tossed by storms which would almost overwhelm them, he was moved with solicitude and fear. For he had not so put off all paternal affection, as to be entirely without care for those who were of his own blood. He, therefore, foreseeing many troubles, many dangers, many assaults, and even many slaughters, which threatened his seed with as many destructions, could not but kindle with them, and, as a man, be troubled at the sight. But in order that he might rise against every kind of temptation with victorious constancy of mind, he commits himself unto the Lord, who had promised that he would be the guardian of his people. Unless this circumstance be observed, I do not see why Jacob exclaims here, rather than at the beginning or the end of his discourse, that he waited for the salvation of the Lord. But when this sad confusion of things presented itself to him, which was not only sufficiently violent to shake his faith, but was more than sufficiently burdensome entirely to overwhelm his mind, his best remedy was to oppose to it this shield. I doubt not also, that he would advise his sons to rise with him to the exercise of the same confidence. Moreover, because he could not be the author of his own salvation, it was necessary for him to repose upon the promise of God. In the same manner, also, must we, at this day, hope for the salvation of the Church, for although it seems to be tossed on a turbulent sea, and almost sunk in the waves, and though still greater storms are to be feared in future, yet amidst manifold destructions, salvation is to be hoped for, in that deliverance which the Lord has promised. It is even possible that Jacob, foreseeing by the Spirit, how great would be the ingratitude, perfidy, and wickedness of his posterity, by which the grace of God might be smothered, was contending against these temptations. But although he expected salvation not for himself alone, but for all his posterity, this, however, deserves to be specially noted, that he exhibits the life-giving covenant of God to many generations, so as to prove his own confidence that, after his death, God would be faithful to his promise. Whence also it follows, that, with his last breath, and as if in the midst of death, he laid hold on eternal life. But if he, amidst obscure shadows, relying on a redemption seen afar off, boldly went forth to meet death, what ought we to do, on whom the clear day has shined? Or what excuse remains for us, if our minds fail amid similar agitations? Genesis 49. Verse 19. Get a true. Jacob also makes allusion to the name of Gad. He had been so called because Jacob had obtained a numerous offspring by his mother Leah. His father now admonishes him that though his name implied a multitude, he should yet have to do with a great number of enemies, by whom, for a time, he would be oppressed, and he predicts this event, not that his posterity might confide in their own strength, and become proud, but that they might prepare themselves to endure the suffering by which the Lord intended, and now decreed to humble them. Yet, as he here exhorts them to patient endurance, so he presently raises and animates them by the superadded consolation, that, at length, they should emerge from oppression, and should triumph over those enemies by whom they had been vanquished and routed. But this only at the last. Moreover, this prophecy may be applied to the whole church, which is assailed not for one day only, but is perpetually crushed by fresh attacks, until at length God shall exalt it to honor. Verse 20. Out of Asher. The inheritance of Asher is but just alluded to, which he declares shall be fruitful in the best and finest wheat, so that it shall need no foreign supply of food, having abundance at home. By royal dainties, he means such as are exquisite. Should anyone object that it is no great thing to be fed with nutritious and pleasant bread, I answer, we must consider the end designed, namely, that they might hereby know that they were fed by the paternal care of God. Verse 21. Naphtali. Some think that in the tribe of Naphtali fleetness is commended. I rather approve another meaning, namely, that it will guard and defend itself by eloquence and suavity of words, rather than by force of arms. It is, however, no despicable virtue to soothe ferocious minds, and to appease excited anger, by bland and gentle discourse. Or if any offense has been stirred up, to allay it by a similar artifice. He therefore assigns this praise to the sons of Naphtali, that they shall rather study to fortify themselves by humanity, by sweet words, and by the arts of peace, than by the defense of arms. He compares them to a hind let loose, which having been taken in hunting, is not put to death, but is rather cherished with delicacies. Verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough. Others translate it, a son of honor. 21 and both are suitable, but I rather incline to the former sense, because it seems to me that it refers to the name Joseph, by which addition or increase is signified. Although I have no objection to the similitude taken from a tree, vehicle, being planted near a fountain, draws from the watered earth the moisture and sap by which it grows the faster. The sum of the figure is, that he is born to grow like a tree situated near a fountain, so that, by its beauty and lofty stature, it may surmount the obstacles around it. For I do not interpret the words which follow to mean that there will be an assemblage of virgins upon the walls, whom the sight of the tree shall have attracted. But, by a continued metaphor, I suppose the tender and smaller branches to be called daughters. 22 And they are said to run over the wall when they spread themselves far and wide. Besides, Jacob's discourse does not relate simply to the whole tribe, nor is it a mere prophecy of future times, but the personal history of Joseph is blended with that of his descendants. Thus some things are peculiar to himself, and others belong to the two tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. So when Joseph is said to have been grieved, this is wont to be referred especially to himself. And whereas Jacob has compared him to a tree, so he calls both his brethren and Potiphar, with his wife, archers. 23 Afterwards, however, he changes the figure by making Joseph himself like a strenuous archer, whose bow abides in strength, and whose arms are not relaxed, nor have lost, in any degree, their vigor. By which expressions he predicts the invincible fortitude of Joseph, because he has yielded to no blows, however hard and severe. At the same time we are taught that he stood, not by the power of his own arm, but as being strengthened by the hand of God, whom he distinguishes by the peculiar title of the mighty God of Jacob, because he designed his power to be chiefly conspicuous, and to shine most brightly in the church. Meanwhile, he declares that the help by which Joseph was assisted, arose from hands, that God had chosen that family for himself, for the Holy Fathers were extremely solicitous that the gratuitous covenant of God should be remembered by themselves and by their children, whenever any benefit was granted unto them. And truly it is a mark of shameful negligence, not to inquire from what fountain we drink water. In the meantime he tacitly censures the impious and ungodly fury of his 10 sons, because, by attempting the murder of their brother, they, like the giants, had carried on war against God. He also admonishes them for the future, that they should rather choose to be protected by the guardianship of God, than to make him their enemy, seeing that he is alike willing to give help to all. And hence arises a consideration consolatory to all the pious, when they hear that the power of God resides in the midst of the church, if they do but glory in him alone. As the psalm teaches, some trust in chariots, and some in horses. But we will invoke the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 27. The sons of Jacob, therefore, must take care lest they, by confiding in their own strength, precipitate themselves into ruin, but must rather bear themselves nobly and triumphantly in the Lord. What follows admits of various interpretations. Some translate it, from thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, as if Jacob would say that Joseph had been the nourisher and rock, or stay of his house. Others read, the shepherd of the stone, in the genitive case, which I approve, except that they mistake the sense, by taking stone to mean family. I refer it to God, who assigned the office of shepherd to his servant Joseph, in the manner in which anyone uses the service of a hireling to feed his flock. For whence did it arise that he nourished his own people, except that he was the dispenser of the divine beneficence? Moreover, under this type, the image of Christ is depicted to us, who, before he should come forth as the conqueror of death and the author of life, was set as a mark of contradiction, Hebrews 12:3, against whom all cast their darts. As now also, after his example, the church also must be transfixed with many arrows, that she may be kept by the wonderful help of God. Moreover, lest the brethren should maliciously envy Joseph, Jacob sets his victory in an amiable point of view to them, by saying that he had been liberated in order that he might become their nourisher or shepherd.